Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Chander in Palo Alto, still in shelter in place. I think it's third week now.
Yeah, and this is Arne in Oslo. Same thing here, although we're allowed to go to the shops, but otherwise, very much low level of activity.
So all the shops are open or only grocery stores and pharmacies?
All shops are allowed to be open, but there are not a whole lot of customers, so some choose to stay closed. And then bars, so serving of alcohol is closed.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
alcohol is the opposite of social distancing, apparently.
I think it's a good idea. Also, I think alcohol is not good for the immune system. So it's good not to drink when you have to be, your immune system has to be stronger.
Exactly.
Okay, so today we thought we cover a topic that's being affected by coronavirus. I think especially students or people who have kids, they're seeing more remote learning or schools are trying to teach kids online. I was taking classes at Stanford, and once shelter in place came into effect, the last two classes were held on Zoom. So the topic is EdTech, which is short for Education Technologies. So maybe, and I find it hard to think about things that are not affected by coronavirus. So this is a topic that's affected by it, but it's a good topic in itself. So I thought we picked that because it's for startups, it's good topic, and also it's affected by coronavirus. So Arne, you want to define for us how, as a venture capital, what do you see as EdTech?
Yeah, I mean, it's not very complicated, to be honest. EdTech, it stands for educational technology, and it's essentially, combining the use of IT and educational practices to facilitate and enhance learning. Essentially, delivering it more effectively, from a delivery perspective, and also making the learning itself more effective.
Yeah. So
and it has been around for much longer than the coronavirus. So I'd say there's actually been a trend in EdTech since the internet age started, late 90s, but it's sort of been back and forth a little bit. And once again, I guess this can be a breakout moment with like millions of kids around the world not going to school, and it's once again the moment where it needs to step up.
Yeah, you're right. I remember when I was in Boston, there was this company, One Laptop Per Child, OLTP, or One Laptop Per Child, or something like that. Negroponte, I think, that was MIT professor. He created these laptops which could be charged by solar or either solar, or there was a crank, you just moved something. So it had long battery life. Basically, they were designed for kids in countries where there's no electricity. So the kids could use this and learn remotely. And I think the most popular thing out of EdTech has been Khan Academy, or Khan Academy, which has these short lessons on a variety of topics, and that's based right here in Menlo Park. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So broadly, I see EdTech in three different ways, or there are three types in my view. One is the technology that's used inside the classroom. So where, the teachers can see how kids are performing inside the classroom, the response time, quizzes, etc. And then second is remote learning, where you don't have to go to the classroom. You can, be at home or somewhere else to learn. And here I want to mention a counter example. Most of the EdTech is, in this case, the kids or students stay home and the professors teach them from wherever. But there was a project called Minerva, or I think initially it was called Minerva University. And they raised a lot of money with like heavy backers, like Larry Summers was one of the backers. Their idea was to get the kids in one place, or students, and then have the teachers be remote. So you still have the interaction of, learning from peers and develop relationships, but you get the best teachers from around the world and they stream inside this classroom. So in total, they raised 128 million so until last year, but whatever I've heard, it's not going as planned. And their first year of admission was even harder to get in than Harvard. There were so many applications, but I don't know what the status is, but I know it didn't go as planned. And the third one is communication. So that could be between teachers or among teachers, student to teacher, teachers to student, and teacher to teacher. So these are three categories: in classroom, remote learning, and communication.
Yeah, and I think there's even more to them if you start, segmenting it into it. But I guess that's like a high level categorization that kind of works.
Yeah, I think you wanted to segment them by kind of, the level of education, the school, or maybe can you talk about that, how you saw the segmentation?
Yeah, so I guess your way to think about it is kind of like how it's used from a practical perspective. The way that I think about it is in terms of segments of the market, and so you have like offerings attacking different segments in terms of, so schools is like kindergarten to 12th grade. And then you have the segment of higher education. I believe the Minerva project that you mentioned would be a higher ed type of thing. But you also have EdTech that operates in the corporate training, corporate learning space. So training people for specific jobs, and particularly inside a specific company. And then you have like another segment, which is, the lifelong learning segment, which is more like individuals, who are in professional workforce, but they are training themselves to, get a better jobs and progress in life, even if they're sort of out of the normal age where they go to school or college. So I'd say those are like the segments that are being attacked from a market perspective.
Yeah, makes sense. So why do you think, it's been around for at least a decade, or I would say almost 2 decades. Why do you think it hasn't taken off? It's still, limited use. Like, what are the reasons that it hasn't worked? It might change, but so far, why hasn't it worked?
Well, it hasn't worked to the extent that, it has worked to some level. There are success stories, but there hasn't been built like a Google or a Facebook or any company of that size in the EdTech space. And also education, if you look at it overall, is less changed than another number of other segments. As well as if you look into, for example, VC funding into the EdTech space, that's also been at the lower level, and it's sort of bubbled up from time to time, but then it's died down, and over the last 5 years there's been a rise again. But it hasn't yielded big outcomes and huge returns. And I think it's sort of the short version of the VC's view on it is that certainly if you look at the school market or the formal education market, like colleges and universities and so forth, it's either a very sort of complicated space to sell into it, because you're dealing with like lots of school districts and dispersed budgets and very complicated regulation and also procurement processes. So there's a very slow go-to-market, and it's hard to prove the effect, and it's sort of hitting an industry that's slow to change, essentially. So that's the problem in that segment. And then if you sort of try to go around and, you know, say sell to individual teachers, they have very limited budgets, and it's hard to scale. And also selling to, you know, parents or students directly, you get into something where, you know, they're also already expected to be served through whatever school or college or whatever they go to. So the discretionary spend in addition to that is somewhat low, and there's a relatively higher acquisition cost to get customers. So it's just over time has proven to be somewhat of a messy go-to-market.
Mm-hmm. And is it the same all over the world? Because, you know, healthcare is also a very slow to change industry, but it's uneven around the world. You know, you like US, as we talked in one of the episodes, it's like 17% of GDP, but in other countries, it's half of that. So, and they're more advanced how they use technology. So in education, have you seen, you know, there's a different adoption curve, or it's everywhere is the same?
Well, I don't have like a complete global view of that. And for example, when EdTech funding over the last 2 years have, or well, maybe more like a 2018 view, like the market leader in the world by far was China, and exactly what's going on in China, I should be careful to say. I think it's been, you know, a slow burn both in Europe and in the US. And even if the markets are a little bit different, it's been hard to really break through. That said, I think the Nordics have probably done better from a like startup success perspective than maybe bigger markets, and also had some success in exporting into other markets. And I can come back to some examples from Norway that's been reasonably successful. But it hasn't been world changing. It hasn't changed the industry overall. Like for example, the media industry isn't what it was 20 years ago, whereas school is still, in most of the Western world, still more similar to what it was 20 years ago than that it's been changed completely.
I think the change I see is it used to be blackboard, now it's whiteboard.
Yeah, you can say that, but so what has been, well, what part of school has been changed? Even in looking at a US school or a Norwegian school, there is certainly use of technology in terms of administration of school, communicating with students and teachers and parents and all sorts of things. So this platform for managing the stakeholders in school has become a technology platform, and that wasn't the case 20 years ago. And there are tools being used here and there all over the place, but teaching in the classroom is still the primary method of delivering. I'd say it's probably been more successful, more in self-learning. I think the learning content on YouTube from even small tasks is enormous, right? So I think self-learning of things from YouTube is a big change in the world that doesn't impact schools' everyday life so much. And also I would say the impact in sort of corporate training has been increasing steadily over the last 20 years. And you also see this self-learning or lifelong learning with companies like Coursera and Udacity and these sort of companies becoming, I believe they're both in sort of the unicorn range. for training people new skills.
Oh, they're above $1 billion valuation?
I believe so. I haven't looked it up, but they're in that range, yes.
Wow. So I see your point regarding YouTube, but I think that's more, it depends how you define education. I mean, there are a lot of videos which are more problem specific. Like you want to be educated on how to clean the filter in the car or how to do something. I'm sure you'll find a video for any task that there is on YouTube. So that's very, task specific. And that's educational. But I guess we should talk about, like, how are we defining education? What's the purpose of education?
Well, yeah, then we get into the philosophy of it. I take a pretty broad view.
And you don't.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I said, yeah, which philosophy I love and you don't.
Right. But anyway, yeah, I take a pretty broad view of education. And anytime you learn new skills, that's education to me. Of course, you don't get a PhD by watching a video on YouTube on how you screw in the screw. Mm-hmm. And I think you're unlikely to get a PhD in philosophy from YouTube. But some segments of the market, there are quite broader collection of learning material like coding and this sort of thing than maybe other topics. And there's some of them that fit the video format better than others, so to speak.
Yeah, so you're right. So I think when you say you cannot get a PhD, it's because the educational institute has that power to give you the PhD. Somebody has to recognize that PhD. And so it doesn't help if I may learn more from YouTube, but I won't get a PhD. And then I cannot get a job with that, knowledge because it's not recognized. And there are topics like coding where the interview process filters it out. You know it or you don't. So I think you'll see Tesla and the newer tech companies don't really care if you have a degree or not for these type of jobs. As long as you can pass the coding interview, that means you can do the job. So it varies with what it is. Yeah, how much risk the companies want to take.
Yeah, and I think, so if you look at, well, what if, let's call Harvard and Stanford sort of gold standard in education for a higher education, so to speak. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the whole system is built on scarcity. And if it were on YouTube, it by definition would not be scarce. And therefore it would lose its gold plating, right? So there are things that don't necessarily fit in that format, or the stakeholders don't necessarily benefit from it. And obviously there's a lots of sort of the softer side of meeting other smart students and discussing and so forth, and that you get from that sort of education. But for a number of skills, you can learn them in different ways than going to Harvard or Stanford.
Yeah, I think it's not really, so my view is it's not that they can take an average student and make him or her brilliant. They get the best, so they come out. Those students, if they go to any school, they would come out good. They are, because how the process works is it attracts the best, and then they're the best anyways, so it doesn't matter where they go.
Yeah, but it does matter, because it actually does yield result that the best interact with other ones to come up with better ideas and so forth. So I do think there is definitely a benefit to very smart people talking to each other. And even for lesser smart people, there's also benefit to talking to each other, right? So there are things that are inherently more hard to solve through technology. But serving content and making it easily digestible and as easy to learn from than possible is clearly something that technology is well suited for. And you can then get access to the best tutors rather than the one who's in your neighborhood. So there are clearly areas where technology play better than the physical world as well.
Yeah, but I disagree in terms of, if I think the smart is defined very narrowly. People who get into, let's say, in undergrad Harvard, they are good in, let's say, to passing SAT, getting their grades. That doesn't necessarily mean they are good in learning new concepts and applying them and connecting the dots. And people, at that age, at 18, you're not sitting around solving problems, you have other interests. So it's the brand that gets them there. But those people can go anywhere. They will still talk to each other and do whatever they do. So it's not the brand that's making them smarter. They are smart in certain ways. So it's just how the system has developed. There is a premium paid by companies to hire people from them. It basically gives them like a less energy consuming way of selecting graduates to hire. You went to Harvard? Okay, I don't have to worry about if you are academically smart or not. It's like you buy any product. You buy a Gillette razor. If there are 20 others, you pay more because it's good. The other one may be as good, but you don't want to spend time analyzing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's something to what you said, but I'm not quite prepared to say that there's no value to very smart people interacting, and that the experience in college is also not worth something. I think the whole experience is obviously
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that interaction can happen in any other place. It doesn't have to happen in an Ivy League school. Of course, there's value in people interacting, but that interaction happening at a campus at Harvard or Columbia it's the same. It would happen at Menlo College or wherever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think regardless, I think there's a clear value to it. I guess one of the key questions is obviously, how big is the value relative to the expense? And if you come out of Harvard or Stanford, you also are likely to make a very good living afterwards. So even if it's super expensive, it's also probably very a good investment for most people. However, you can, if you look at the cost of college, and this is a particularly a US perspective, although there's some tendencies, but to a lesser extent in the rest of the world, the cost of college education has been rising much, much faster than inflation and cost of living overall. And so it's just getting too expensive. And if you're then paying, relatively premium price for your Menlo College education, and you don't see the benefit hitting the labor market, then something is wrong. And I think that sort of price versus value perspective now is coming out of whack. And I think that's one of the main drivers for also investment into alternative education, alternative packaging of education today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think we should get back to EdTech. We are getting distracted by the value of education. On the tech side, I don't think much has changed inside those schools how things are taught. Do you know if, like, I take classes at Stanford for my own interest. Many of them are in philosophy, but it's the same. Like I, studied 20 years ago. The same way things are taught.
Well, Stanford has online classes, and most universities have some level of online classes. And I'm sure technology is being used for testing, I guess. Probably more the hard skills than the philosophy skills for testing. And there are supplementary material and interactivity to assignments that are interactive and this sort of thing. This goes on in the whole world, but it's still the core of it is much the same in many places.
Yeah, and like I think something you said, there's value in this in-person interaction, and that's been the case for sales meetings and in-person meetings. And you see, just in last 1 month, I think you pointed that out in the last podcast, that this may be more permanent change, that people do more video because it seems to work fine. So the same thing has been said about education. There's value in getting students together and interaction. Now, is the value lessened if they do it over video? We'll find that out. But I think that assumption has been challenged. It's kind of, everybody believed that until a month ago, that in person is always much better than, or let's say the other way, the video doesn't really work. Now people see, yeah, it's working.
Yeah, but I think there are multiple ways of how people approach this whole thing with technology. So, for example, there are some new alternative private schools, just like there are like in healthcare. There are like One Medical, for example, which is a chain of primary care units that have video as their front end, and they have like diagnostics on their app, and they repackage the whole experience of having a primary healthcare system to be a more tech-enabled one. And you see the same thing, just probably moving slightly slower behind on schooling side as well, where it's more like a fully fledged technology-enabled school. So that's like I'd say the full stack solution. But the other alternative is, of course, that you use the current system and then you just plug more technology in as you go, and it develops slower, but you have like learning management systems, you have content that's delivered electronically, you have more analytics for testing and can figure out what people need to learn more about. You have the massively online course material like Khan Academy and this sort of thing. And so there are all these sort of things that are more sort of tools or point solutions that sort of come in and play for various parts of segments we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember some stat from a while ago when MOOC was the term you heard every other day.
Exactly.
That stands for massive online something classroom.
Yeah.
I forget what the other O is, but basically, I think 50% of people dropped out after the first class, and then only like 5% or some very small number completed the course, which I think is still better than zero. Before, nobody could have access to it, and now at least 5% who join are getting something. But the numbers were surprising, or at least I was surprised how low the completion rate was.
Yeah, and it's a higher, a lesser level of commitment, right? So it stands for massive open online course. That's what it stands for. But say that's a free course, right? And you say, oh, I'd like to learn something about this, and then a Thursday afternoon you sit down to try to learn something about this, and you enroll, and it's free, right? And then it turns out that it was slightly harder to learn this, and you don't have as much time as you thought, right? The likelihood of dropping off is big. If you've spent your life trying to get into a great university and you're paying through your nose to be there, your incentive for completing completing it and your attention to it is obviously much higher, right?
Yeah. Also, if you already have a job or you're doing this for fun, then it's different than if you are, doing it to get a degree, which is in many places is a necessity to get a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we like? How do you see the landscape changing? Like 10 years from now, how do you see EdTech changing, the university system changing? Because it's like, it reminds me a lot about healthcare. There have been predictions of it being turned upside down for decades, but not much has changed. So what, because here also there are a lot of losers. If people figure out you can get as good a job by doing something online versus going to Stanford at 10% of the cost, people won't go to Stanford.
Yeah, so obviously, if I knew what EdTech looked like in 10 years, I would make the investments there and make lots of money. And it's not a segment that I spend that much time on, or have done at least, although I'm quite interested in it. So I think it's very hard to tell, but I think it's a slow moving industry fundamentally. And so I have some belief in that it needs to be challenged from the outside with these alternative models. And if they turn out to be quite successful, it challenges the whole system. And that makes the older model have to step up to stay competitive. And so I think that external pressure for competition, and I don't think it's going to hit Harvard and Stanford, as we talked about early on. And I think it also is not likely to challenge the government-run schools in Europe initially, but I think, like say, a very successful private school system that's more tech-enabled in the US comes up and fundamentally challenges it, and more children start going to those schools. I think that will challenge the alternative private schools in the US significantly. And I do see that there's quite movement in sort of the vocational training in today's market into new training models.
Yeah, I think that was the idea Minerva project had, but it didn't work. And surprisingly, what I see working is still old school. So I hire, I've hired many user experience designers, and most of them come from General Assembly. So which is like not online, but actual physical school you go to for 3 months. You pay them, I think, $10,000-$15,000, and you get a certificate that you are a UX designer. They do teach them practical things. They do some project, and this is something I can test. So when I hire somebody, I give them an assignment, and I see how they perform. They compete, and you can filter in who you take in. I don't care what degree they have. I see the work. So that's working. Like General Assembly, I think they're pretty successful. And same thing, I see there's product school. So they're teaching people how to do product management. I don't know how successful they are, but GA, it's pretty old school, You get people in, you train them, and then they get a job. There's not much tech involved.
Yeah, and I think this whole thing where that people go and train for a specific job, and you do that in a year or less, rather than spending 4 years on something that's very, very expensive, and a lot of what you learn you probably will not use. I think the experience of that 4 years is wonderful, and it develops very diverse people who can do a number of things. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe for a number of jobs that's the optimal way of training for it. So the thing you described from General Assembly, I think there will be more of that sort of thing going forward.
Yeah, it's then I think, get into the purpose of education. One, it's only expensive in the US. I think most of the world education is free or almost free. Then I think the purpose of education is not just to get a job. It's like in philosophy, we have this debate all the time: is knowledge an instrument, or knowledge is an end in itself? And it's something we debate about all the time. So my view is knowledge is an end in itself. Its purpose is not always to be an instrument to do something with it. I mean, you have to learn how to be, your civic duty, the interconnectedness of the world. You have to learn. It shouldn't end after you finish your degree. So I think the product school or GA, they're good supplements. But even within those 4 years, you choose which discipline you are interested in. If you go into, electrical engineering, you will work as an engineer or in that field. But it's only the more liberal art fields, there aren't as many jobs, so they end up doing something else.
Yeah, but so you know what, this goes a little bit beyond the EdTech part of it. But I think if you spend 12 years in school, mm-hmm. Those 12 years in school should develop reasonably well-rounded people, I think. And I think that should also include developing curiosity to learn to develop as human. And I think most people should continue to learn lifelong and develop as humans. Mm-hmm. But it is still different than developing skills for a job. These two things complement themselves. But I think from, the objective when you finish an education is also to be qualified for a job. And I think there is a purpose of doing that rather efficiently for the job that you should be doing. And I think that it's worthwhile finding ways of doing that fairly efficiently. And I still think that's going to be a main trend going forward. Because even if you do, there's a mix of how much you pay in various countries, but the reality is that cost of a college degree is very expensive around the world, regardless of who pays it. And it's a question of, can societies afford that at that cost level for a large part of the population?
Well, it's working fine in Europe and Asia, I think. Well, anyway, that'll be more philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
But there is some of the Nordic startups like Kahoot. What's happening in the Nordics related to EdTech?
I'll do that, but there's one thing before we get there that I think I kind of think is an interesting, and I think a lot of the investment and interest is going into this, and this is more like a US angle to it, but because the cost of college has become so high, one of these trends have been like education, where somebody else pays for your education, and when you are done with your education, you get a job, you share some of your salary with the institution or whoever paid for your education. So this is something called income sharing agreements that's been sort of a hot topic, and people either hate or love. And it's kind of the wild west of education, and where some of the money has gone in and the interest is. And maybe the most famous example of this is called Lambda School, which is a school for learning skills like programming and this sort of thing. And their model, it's well known to part of the audience, I guess, but it's also kind of new to some others, where the people who get the education in Lambda School, they have to pay 70% of their income after they start making $50,000 a year. till they paid off $30,000. But this is sort of a way of bootstrapping for those people who can't afford to pay for this type of education and take the risk out of being in debt. But it's also one of those things. If it's not giving you the benefit in salary that you're expecting, you suddenly become a slave to this one. So this is a very hotly contended area and quite an interesting space to follow.
Yeah. Here also, you're seeing knowledge as an instrument. You're getting education to get a job. I think a society should be able to afford, somebody who wants to, learn about, Cicero, the history, philosophy, just for, the sake of knowledge, not necessarily to get a job.
I understand. In this model, it's clearly based on a job, and investors pay for your education so that you can start making money. So it is a brute force one, and I would completely agree that there are no investors who will pay for your philosophy degree.
That's why I'm still working. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, Nordic companies. This is going to be like a little bit of actually a Norwegian tilt to it more than anything. But Norway has had in a fair number of reasonable successes in the e-learning space. And the original two sort of companies that made it out of here was called Fronter and It's Learning, which are more sort of e-learning or sort of learning management platforms or learning platforms. They've now merged, but they're sort of still a market leader in Europe for managing, learning in schools. There's also a new one called Schooler in that space. So there's like a cluster here going on. The most famous company now, which is also a member of the Nordic Innovation House community that both Chandler and I have spent lots of time in, it's called Kahoot. And that's an interactive tool for doing more sort of multiple choice gaming. So it's very, very successful in getting kids in school and in all sorts of education very excited about competing and figuring out who can answer the questions right, and has proven to be very addictive and engaging for the students. Even if it seems like a very simple idea, they are now at the level where they've had more than 1 billion games played. And it's actually gotten to the point where it's a listed company on the Oslo Stock Exchange with a market cap of 8.2 billion NOK, which is about $800 million.
Oh,
so
wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So it's a big one. I think last quarter there was like 218 million games played on the platform.
Wow, cool. Yeah, I'm glad it's somebody succeeding in this space. At least Silicon Valley hasn't succeeded in this. A lot of money went into it from very high profile people. Like Alt School, that's Zuckerberg and a lot of other, like somebody from Google. Big money went into creating this tech-enabled schools, and I don't know why it didn't work. And that's just one experiment. Multiple experiments with a lot of money, a lot of smart people, but nothing has worked so far in the Valley when it comes to EdTech. So I'm glad something's working from the Nordics.
Yeah, and I can mention briefly two other examples. One other company is called Atense, also a member of the same community in Palo Alto, but and the founder is actually a friend of mine here in Oslo. They do simulation-based training. So these are people who, a lot of people in the company are from the games industry, and they build sort of 3D environments where people interact. And so simulation is everything from a person working in a retail store, how to interact with customers. training interaction with customers. It's like they do training of hospital staff before moving into a new hospital, and they even have like training psychologists how to deal with youths in institutions who have various behavioral issues. So it's very much a sort of training the human engagement side and skills for that in specific jobs. It's a very cool company, very interesting. And also in our portfolio, we have a company called Scrimba. And so they have like a tool for very efficiently learning to code. And so if you're on YouTube and you watch coding videos, a lot of it's essentially a video of people writing code. And so they have Scrimba has a more efficient way of doing that. You can stop the video and you can go in and you can play with the code and see the effect. So it's much higher level of interactivity than what you have in your normal way of delivering code, screencasts and this sort of thing.
Yeah, cool.
So there's some innovative companies coming out from here.
Yeah, that's good. I do want to recognize MIT. I think they were the first one to put all the lectures from their courses online for free. So I think they are, fulfilling a higher purpose that everyone should have access to knowledge, compared to Harvard, which is right next door. I don't know if they're still doing it, but at that time they were very protective of what, they put online and whatever else. But in the US, they were the first university that pioneered this idea of, okay, put everything online for free. So anybody can, whoever is interested in acquiring more knowledge can get that for free. The lectures, the coursework, assignments, all of it. If you search MIT Open Courseware, you'll see, you can find, all the classes from MIT. Yeah.
Very good.
So now I think we should pick that topic up in a few months to see, or briefly, in the post-corona world, will we see more remote education? It remains to be seen. But well, I hope so, but we'll see.
I think there will definitely not be less.
Yeah.
Why would it regress below? Unless the corona thing lasts so long that people are dying to throw away their computers, I don't see how it could regress below what it was before.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it won't, but the point is now that people have used it, how many stick? So my feeling is a few more will stick than before, but we'll see. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everybody. And thanks again to everybody who's working and not working from home so that we all can work from home.
Keep the wheels turning and keep spending the money so we keep businesses in business.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Arne. Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.